Welcome to Husband Talking. Explore riveting tales of infidelity with us. Please subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin.
My phone rang at the worst possible time as I studied the project I was working on. I pulled it out of my pocket and didn't recognize the number. Fearing it was a telemarketer, I answered. It was worse. "Can I speak to John Carter?" the officious voice asked. I assured her she was speaking to John Carter. "Hold for Ms. Reynolds," the voice ordered. Instead, I hung up. Within a minute, I got another call. "Mr. Harris, I'm sorry we were cut off. Please hold for Ms. Reynolds." Again, I hung up. The phone started ringing again. I answered with an exasperated tone. The caller explained how this scenario was supposed to work. I interrupted. "Please inform Ms. Reynolds that I have no inclination to talk to her today or any other day." I hung up and tried to focus on my work. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I saw the same number and let it go to voicemail. Soon, the icon appeared indicating a message. I didn't feel any need to find out what it was. I had decided on my course of action and began placing items. The phone interrupted again, and I turned it off. One of the first lessons I ever learned about power tools was to concentrate on what I was doing. It helped maintain safety and made time pass quickly. I focused on placing the 2x4 by 10-foot pine boards into a vertical parallel pattern with 16 in intervals between the studs. Then came the horizontal 2x4s, 1 on top, 2 on the bottom. Using my measuring tape, I determined it was square and went at each stud, driving nails from the power hammer to secure the studs into the frame. I stopped to examine my work, decided it was acceptable, and lifted the frame upright, bracing it against the unfinished basement wall. Leaning against the frame, I quickly found one of the pre-drilled holes I had made in the horizontal bottom board, grabbed the second air hammer, and drove the long concrete nails all along the bottom. A quick look with my level showed it was okay, and I quickly braced the top. Another check to ensure it remained square, and I stepped back to observe the result. By itself, it didn't look like much in the stark empty basement, but I had made the frame and had it up within 15 minutes. At 4 frames an hour, I should complete the framing this evening and be one step closer to completion. I was glad the earlier projects of running the conduit lines, electrical wiring, and HVAC ductwork had worked out well. Thank God the plumbing was already installed, so that was one headache I wouldn't have to worry about. This evening, I would finish the framing, Saturday put up the insulation and paneling, and Sunday lay down the wood parquet tiles. That would justify my weekend reward of a 4-pack of beer icing down in my cooler. Hard to believe that, in a few short weeks, I would check off the entire basement project. Hard to believe I now limited my drinking to a single 4-pack of beer per weekend, 2 beers a day after all daily tasks were completed. It hadn't been that long ago that a 4-pack was just a warm-up for some serious drinking. Thanks to Ms. Reynolds, or rather, Ms. Olivia Cheating Johnson, my ex-wife. I shook my head at the animosity I felt for Olivia now. How could a woman I was so totally committed to and in love with turn out to be such a witch? I forced myself to focus back on my framing. The more I worked, the less time I had to think, the sooner I would get through so I could jump into a hot shower and then knock down the 2 long necks and head to bed. If I was lucky, there would be no dreams. That was the crux of my existence nowadays, stay busy. So there was no time for the pain. It was a hell of a way to live, but it beat dying every day. With that last thought, I began preparing the boards for the second frame and the third and the fourth and so on down the line. I staggered upstairs for my libations and a hot shower before bed. When I woke up, I remembered to turn on my cell phone again. 20 freaking calls and voicemail messages, all from the same source as yesterday. I dumped all the calls without bothering to listen to whatever demands Olivia's secretary thought were necessary. As I dressed, I was cheered by the fact that I wouldn't be bothered for the weekend. I went on my computer and checked a few pressing business situations, sent out several emails on how to deal with them, and went downstairs. A quick trip to the kitchen provided me with my bowl of Wheaties, and I munched down my breakfast of champions. With a sigh, I trudged back downstairs to the basement, put on my mask, and started installing the rolls of insulation to the frames. I had a portable radio tuned to a classic rock station, and I whiled away the hours, interspersing the songs with the noise of my labors and the occasional profanity slipping from me. By mid-afternoon, I had completed the insulation installation and went upstairs to fix a sandwich. As I ate the turkey sandwich, I stared outside at the gloomy, rainy October day. It reminded me of another rainy October day from last year. I remembered standing drenched outside my in-laws' house after landing in Chicago on Christmas morning. It would be a surprise visit, as I certainly didn't get an invitation to attend from either my wife, children, or parents-in-law. When the door swung open, I saw the surprised look on my brother-in-law's face. Before he could come up with some lame excuse, I managed to walk by him into the happy bustle in the house. My 16-year-old son, Ethan, looked down at the floor. Emily, my 17-year-old daughter, hurriedly excused herself from the room. My wife, Olivia, extracted herself from the lap of the stranger holding her so familiarly. Even in her shame, she sought to mitigate the damage by introducing me to Mike Dawson. The stranger arose out of the chair and held out his hand for me to shake. I just stood there and stared at him until he finally dropped his hand. Meanwhile, my dear mother-in-law scurried into the room to ensure nothing dramatic would happen. I thought at least I was getting her carpet wet as the raindrops continued to drip off my trench coat. "Why, Dan, we weren't expecting you. When did you arrive?" the witch said. I ignored her as I tried to catch my wife's face. But she apparently found something very interesting on her mother's wall and wouldn't turn to face me. I went back to the front door, walked outside, pulled out my cell phone, and called a taxi service. With any luck, I could catch the cab that had dropped me off before he got too far away. No one from inside the house came out to persuade me to stay. I sighed as the painful memory came to an end. I went back down to the basement to begin installing the sheets of paneling. The job went by quickly as the sheets, while bulky, covered a large area. I used the paneling nails to drive into the studs with my claw hammer. Lucky for me, the paneling had cutouts for electrical wall outlets and heating and air vents, all fitting perfectly. Now I could use the heating unit, but I quickly worked up a sweat, so there wasn't much need for heat. I was pleased I had planned so carefully, as I only had a few boards and a couple of sheets of spare paneling left over. I carried them to the garage and stowed them away until I had a chance to get them into the workshop. I installed the electrical outlets and completed the wiring sequence for each one. Since I used traditional color coding, there was no way to mess up a ground wire to a hot wire. After hooking up the system to a circuit breaker in the breaker box, I determined that I had power to each new outlet and adequate circulation to the HVAC system. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a big deal, but I screwed in the outlet covers and duct covers. I then swept the floor several times with the shop vac to get it ready for the adhesive I would be applying in the morning. But now a shower was calling for me. The hot water soothed my aching muscles, and I luxuriated in the steamy water. What a contrast to the bone-chilling cold I felt going back to Chicago International Airport that past Christmas. I was numbed physically and mentally as I negotiated a ticket back home. Damn the cost. I knew my marriage was dead, I just didn't know when the funeral would take place. I toweled off and decided to go to bed. Tomorrow would be another long and hopefully rewarding day. Almost immediately, I fell asleep. Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of a thunderstorm brewing outside. I slipped on my jeans, work boots, and a t-shirt, and trudged downstairs. I only hoped we wouldn't lose power during the day. I turned the radio to a sports station to catch the game. I began to apply the adhesive liberally to the basement floor, smoothing it evenly throughout the entire surface area. I had considered making a custom oak parquet floor for the basement, but decided it would not be cost-efficient. So, I had boxes of pre-made parquet tiles waiting by the stairs. I waited for the adhesive to set for its optimal time before starting to set the tiles down. I went back upstairs and mentally took notes on how to proceed for the next big project, sanding down the floors and staining and varnishing them in the most expedient manner. I made a list of the tools I would need to rent a floor sander and a floor buffer were the two most important. The other tools, small sanders, pry bars, hammers, brushes, rollers, I already had in the workshop. I would have to be extra careful not to crack or break the vintage baseboards or moldings. I would also have to catalog each piece so I would be able to fit each one to the room it belonged in. I went into the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. I looked around the improved kitchen I had finished a month ago. Bright fluorescent light lit up the entire kitchen area. The new Stady-Off-Tart appliances sparkled. I sat in the breakfast nook adjacent to the new food preparation island I had built. The new Mexican glazed tiles added a colorful atmosphere to the island. All I had to do was knock out a non-load-bearing wall to a room that was previously a small servant dining area to vastly extend the entire kitchen. Even expanding the shelves and pantry still made the room too big. I finally built a brick pizza oven that set off the final touch to the kitchen. The thought of pizza brought to mind how I met Olivia, and I drifted off back in time. It was at a freshman mixer at a local pizza parlor at my university. I really didn't want to go, but my roommate insisted. I stood there nursing an illicit underage beer when I saw a tall brunette nearby. She was athletic-looking, with long muscular legs and an amazing body, and she was being harassed by some drunken idiot. I couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it was earned him a slap across his face. Before he could react, I intervened and stood between them so he couldn't assault her. That didn't deter his rage as he tried to get to her. I managed to remain between them as he jostled me every way he could think of. Finally, the bouncers showed up and escorted the guy out. I turned around and stared right into the loveliest set of green eyes I think I've ever seen. She introduced herself as Olivia, and I told her I was Dan. We sat and talked for a while. Then she excused herself, and I thought I would never see her again. A month later, I was walking across campus, and I heard someone yelling at me. This crazed female, dressed in a raggedy outfit with Greek letters across the bib, ran up to me. "Hi, do you have a condom?" The stunned look on my face led her to explain that she was pledging a sorority and needed to get a condom from a student on campus to complete her last task before getting accepted. I could only nod and blush as I opened my wallet and handed her the one I had kept since I was in the 9th grade. She screamed in delight, grabbed it, and ran off to her sorority house. I just watched as that lovely body disappeared from view. Another month passed, and the campus prepared for homecoming. I was walking back to my dorm when this person started walking beside me. I looked and tried to recognize where I had seen this girl before. "Hi, are you ready to rescue me for the 3rd time?" I responded, "I beg your pardon?" She stopped, which forced me to stop, and she repeated, "Are you ready to rescue me for the 3rd time? You saved me at the pizza parlor and when I needed to pledge my sorority. Now I need you to save me again." Puzzled, I asked, "How am I supposed to rescue you?" She explained, "I'm supposed to go to homecoming with a guy from our brother fraternity, but the guy is a real jackass. The only way I can get out of going is to have a date with someone else." I sarcastically said, "Well, that works wonders for my ego. How could I refuse such a gracious offer?" I don't think she realized I was putting her on. She told me what sorority house she lived in and what time to be there. I walked off, wondering what the hell had just happened. I went back to my room and told my roommate what had transpired. He urged me to go on the date since otherwise, I would just spend the evening like every other Saturday night, studying. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a condom, and told me I might just get lucky. In fact, I did not get lucky. I did spend the entire day getting acquainted with Olivia as we both ignored our inept football team and conversed throughout the game. After we left the stadium, we decided to go to a small coffee house to continue our talk. We were so animated that, before we knew it, they were closing the place down. We walked back to her house, and I stalled, trying to decide whether to try for a kiss. Olivia decided for me as she told me good night and walked away without even a peck on the cheek. I took that to mean that I didn't really make the grade as I walked back to my room. When I got in, my roommate was gone. I had grown accustomed to not expecting him to appear back before Sunday evening. I lay on my bed and fell asleep thinking of those green eyes. All next month, I tried to call Olivia, only to be told she was unavailable. Word got back to me that she had started dating some other fellow. I was sad that I had lost out before I even had a chance to get into the game. A clap of thunder shook me out of my reverie of Olivia, and I went back to the basement, laying down the tiles in the tongue and groove set on the sides of the tiles. I halfway listened to the game and only stopped to retrieve a new box of tiles. When I got to the end of the floor, I stood and looked at the tiles, pleased at how they complemented the paneling. Not wanting to stop, I nailed down the miter baseboards, and voila, it was finished. Now all I had to do was install the track lighting and the crown molding, and it would be done except for decorating the basement, but that was for another day. Today I would celebrate. The business week would start in the morning, and I would focus solely on making money during those hours. Perhaps in the evenings, I would complete some small jobs around the house that weren't worthy of wasting a weekend on. Then Friday, the cycle would repeat as I continued to stay busy working on the house. That Friday, I went to the hardware store and picked up the rented floor sander and buffer in my work pickup truck. I also purchased enough coarse, medium, and fine-grade sandpaper pads to complete both floors of my house. Throughout the week, I had spent the evenings carefully prying up the molding and baseboards in all the rooms. I had cataloged each piece and already sanded them down. All I would have to do was sand the areas using the sander, since the baseboards and molding would conceal the area close to the walls. I wouldn't have to sand exactly to the walls. My phone rang, and I saw yet another call from Olivia's office. Sporadically through the past week, I had received calls from her so much that I finally put the number on speed dial so I could instantly recognize it. That got me thinking of a Friday phone call a long time ago. I was studying when the dorm phone rang. I figured it was for my roommate since he was the only one to get calls, but he had already left, so I answered and was ready to take a message for him. "Where the hell are you?" The voice screamed at me. Taken aback, I said, "Who is this?" "What do you mean, who is this?" "This is Olivia." "Now, where the hell are you?" Pissed off, I said, "Well, you called me. Where the hell do you think I am?" "Look, just get over here pronto." I debated not going, but the enticement of seeing her was too persuasive, so I wound up at her sorority house. I gave my name and waited. Soon, I saw Olivia in the hallway, apparently arguing with some guy. The conversation was quite animated as she pointed at me, which earned a look of loathing from the guy. She stormed outside and said, "We got to go," and started leading me away. After a distance, I stopped and said, "Can you tell me what the hell this is about?" She looked angrily at me and said, "That fraternity creep was bothering me again." "And how is that my fault?" I asked. "I needed help," she yelled. "Why didn't you call your boyfriend?" I turned and walked away. I wound up back at the coffee house where we went on our homecoming date. She came in and sat down beside me. She started talking, and before I knew it, I was over being pissed off. Then she told me she wanted to see me, but with one small caveat. "Look, I'm attracted to you, but I'm not ready to be tied down to one guy. So, I want to date you as well as others. If this is meant to be, then we will both know it. Can you handle that?" I wasn't too thrilled with the idea of sharing her with anyone. Then she leaned over and kissed me, and I knew I was a lost soul even then. Some weekends I was lucky enough to get a date with her, and other weekends I would languish back in my room torturing myself with thoughts of her with someone else. After 4 months, I finally had sex with her in her car, and I was even more smitten. Try as I could to convince her, she still refused to stop dating others. That convoluted merry-go-round went on for the next 2 years until one day she came up to me. "I'm pregnant." The earth stood still. She continued to look at me and said it was mine, and I knew what she expected me to do. Mentally, I was screaming inside. I had 1 more year to get my BA in business, then I would get my MBA and go collect a large salary. Then I would be in a position to propose to Olivia. Now was way too soon. Olivia's plan was to get her degree in history and apply to law school. That meant 3 more years for her as well. Now all of a sudden, plans would have to change. We started talking and came up with a solution. We would have a quiet wedding. I would go out to work and support her through law school. When she got a job, she would support me while I got my MBA. Then we would live happily ever after. That was when the hit the fan. I met her mother, also known as the evil witch of the North. She screamed at me for ruining her daughter's life from day one and never let up on me since then. My grandmother, who had raised me, also had reservations about the marriage but limited it to insisting that her house, which I would eventually inherit, be protected by a prenuptial agreement. Olivia was pissed about that, but my grandmother insisted, and she finally signed off on it. We had our quiet shotgun wedding and began living together. That last year in school was rough with Olivia's pregnancy and me trying to support us with any number of odd jobs that came along. I mowed yards, did small home repairs, and contract labor. Nothing was too low as long as it brought money to the table. Somehow, we made it through and we both graduated. Olivia gave birth to our daughter, Emily, and was accepted into law school. Olivia's mom flooded her house with graduation pictures and pictures of the baby. I wasn't included in any of them. I had lucked into a stock brokerage internship, which meant I did all the crappy jobs none of the brokers would do. But I persevered, from doing cold calls to going out to get lunch deliveries. By persevering, I wound up getting my broker's license and began trading stocks under the supervision of a senior broker. As my expertise grew, so did my salary. I started to notice despite every promotion, we were still unable to save any money as Olivia would find new opportunities to spend every dime I got. Then came her 3rd year in law school, and she announced she was pregnant once again. 8 months later, our son, Ethan, was born. Now I was responsible for caring for a newborn, a 3-year-old toddler, and a wife focusing on law school finals and then taking the bar. The times were countless that I held my temper as Olivia or her mother would gripe about something. Still, I knew how important it was for Olivia to realize her dream, so I sucked it up and continued to try to be her support. She spent time with her study group. A couple of times, I would briefly join them when they went to blow off steam at some bar. I would leave early so I could tend to the babies and allow Olivia some me time. My goals didn't match the approval of some of the testosterone-driven male study partners, as they would ridicule me in front of Olivia. I was ready to beat the ever-loving crap out of them, but I knew that would impact negatively on Olivia. So I swallowed my pride and pretended I didn't hear or realize I was the butt of their jokes. Finally, the day arrived when finals were over, and my Olivia wound up being number 3 in her class. I felt pride as she marched across the stage at graduation while I held our children. She was glowing as she introduced me to countless classmates and then left me to attend a graduation party. She didn't come home until 10 the next morning, explaining that she had crashed at her friend's house after she had overdone it. I argued that she should have called me to pick her up, which led to much yelling, causing our children to start crying. I spent the next couple of hours calming them down, then decided to let it slide since the damage was already done. Why upset the children again? If I thought law school was intense, then studying for the bar was sheer hell. Olivia and her study partners ate, lived, and breathed the Law 247 for 4 months preparing for the 3-day ordeal. Again, I did what I could to support her, from foot massages to going on midnight ice cream runs. Olivia came through in flying colors with the top grade on the bar exam. Olivia had no trouble landing a high-paying corporate job in Miami, so we moved. I thought I would start my MBA at ASU. I was quickly informed that I would have to put that idea on hold. Olivia argued that we needed to start out with as much money as we could while she worked to make partner in her firm. She said if I could hold off till then, she would support me in getting my MBA. She convinced me it was necessary for us to have a 2-income family so we could start our nest egg. So, I found a brokerage firm in Miami and began working for them. I soon found out that Olivia subscribed to the Joseph Stalin philosophy that what was hers, and what was mine was negotiable. I was responsible for paying the rent, our cars, the household budget, our student loans, and every other expense under the sun. Olivia was responsible for Olivia. Every attempt I made to account for her salary resulted in a screaming fit from her. I never found out where her salary went. We stayed a decade in Miami before corporate headquarters transferred Olivia to Portland. I suggested we fix up my grandmother's house, which I did inherit after she died. Olivia refused, claiming the dilapidated house looked like the Addams family mansion. I explained that the Victorian mansion could easily be fixed to her satisfaction for the amount she wanted to spend. I think a lot of it was she still felt insulted by my grandmother's demand for a prenuptial. Instead, Olivia found a house with an expensive price tag and a repressive homeowners association. I begged her to reconsider, but she had her mind made up. Against my wishes, I found myself signing paperwork to purchase a house I didn't like in a neighborhood I didn't like, paying for a country club membership I didn't like. Once again, I changed jobs in a brokerage firm where I was the low man on the totem pole. I continued to scrape by, barely able to cover our expenses from month to month. The friction was causing stress in our marriage as she began to denigrate me in front of the children. The final straw was when the house started breaking down, and the homeowners association insisted on me making expensive repairs I couldn't cover. I dreaded going to Olivia, but I was on the razor's edge. My last job review stated I had reached my plateau in earning capacity. In other words, I was stuck in my job with no hope of advancement. I sat down with Olivia and once again tried to explain our precarious situation. I showed her my job review, even though it shamed me. Again, she sneered, declaring her mother had been right about me all along. I sat defeated at the table as she got up and left. The next day, she told me she had a solution. Her company needed someone to go to their New York office and run it until further notice. The scuttlebutt was that whoever got the assignment was the favorite to be the next partner in the firm. She and the children would stay with her mom while I remained down here to clean up the mess I made. Even I could manage to do something right if I had a head start. I held back from unleashing on her. I was sad to see the children weren't overly upset with the notion of being separated from me. Mostly, they seemed excited about moving to New York to be spoiled by their grandmother. For me, the departure at the airport broke my heart, but the three of them were eager to leave. I went back home and cried. The next day, I made an appointment with the Homeowners Association board to discuss my plan to repair the house to their standards. They rejected my plan outright and placed a series of draconian terms I would be forced to comply with. I would have to sacrifice to make everything work. Even with the temporary relief from my family leaving, I was still just managing to tread water financially. I began with the simple jobs that didn't take much knowledge or skill and completed them first. Then I started on the more complex jobs. It seemed for every job I completed, 2 new ones erupted, and I began to despise the money pit I lived in. I could only occasionally get my family on the phone, and when I did, they would terminate the call as quickly as they could. I began to drink heavily. That was frowned upon at my office, but by this time I didn't give a damn. The months passed until the winter holidays got close. I called to ask Olivia to come home so I could be with my family. She told me that wasn't possible due to her work schedule. Then I suggested flying up there. She told me my priority was to fix the house, not spend money on a vacation. Besides, Olivia intimated that her family would be away for Christmas, so there was no need to come up. She handed the phone off to Emily, who told me the family was gathering at her grandmother's, and she was so excited to see her cousins. Then Ethan got on the phone and told me his uncle was taking him to the Patriots game at Madison Square Garden on Christmas. Something wasn't adding up, and I finally had my fill of the situation. I decided I would go to New York. I certainly found the answers to questions I never thought of before, such as how easily I was replaced. The worst answer was when Emily turned 21. I had tried in vain to contact her and Ethan after my trip to New York a number of times, leaving countless voice messages begging them to call me. They never did return my calls. 2 weeks after Emily's birthday, I got a large manila envelope in the mail. Emily had filed in Westchester County to change her name from Emily Turner to Emily Reeves. Her reasoning was she wanted the name of her biological father, Mike J. Dawson. Attached were affidavits from Emily and Mike Dawson, which alleged they had begun an intimate relationship in college through law school, resulting in the birth of their daughter. This was confirmed by notarized DNA results from 3 reputable labs. Included was the file-stamped copy of the judge's order granting the name change. Right then, I knew that when Ethan turned 21, I would get a similar surprise. Then I got the call from Olivia. She asked if I had received a package in the mail, and I told her I had. She explained that copy was supposed to go to her mother, but due to a secretary's mistake, it had been addressed to me. She assured me that the secretary had been terminated for making the mistake. No, Olivia. I'm the one who's been making mistakes. The problem is I've been making them for more than 20 years. I hung up the phone and soon after that I got served the divorce papers. Despite her having the higher-paying job, she insisted I wasn't entitled to an equitable division of the marital assets. What was hers, and what was mine, except for that money pit called the house. Even though she never paid a penny on the house, she expected to get 50 of that asset when it was sold. In other words, I would be out 300,000. I wonder how she reacted when she immediately received back the draconian property settlement agreement with my signature attached with no protest. I took time to refocus on the floors and realized I went on autopilot. The floors were sanded and buffed, ready for staining and varnishing. I was proud of the progress. Tomorrow would see the stain job completed, and midweek, I would start adding several coats of varnish to protect the stain. The stain I selected would look good against the different hues of pastel I painted the various rooms. I twisted off the cap of the first long neck of the day and wandered around all the rooms, discovering minor things that still needed to be addressed, but all were simple and could be done easily. What I needed was another big project to take up time. I continued to look around, weighing options. I found myself out on the master bedroom balcony, looking at the sprawling backyard. Suddenly, it came to me. A large swimming pool with an adjoining hot tub, perhaps a pool house. I smiled at the research I would have to do and what permits I would need. With any luck, the backyard project would take the entire summer. I visualized different sizes and styles of pools and guessed at the prospective costs. Soon, I started hearing the sound of a tortured motor and people yelling. Since they weren't visible from the back, I went to a bedroom facing the front street. I looked down to see a large U-Haul rental truck with a trailer attached, trying to back into the driveway of the house next door. The driver had the trailer jackknifed into the rain-soaked yard and was just spinning the wheels deeper into the lawn. I hurried outside and tapped on the driver's window, startling her. She turned and looked at me in surprise, even as harried as she was dealing with two young children in the passenger seat yelling. She was a knockdown, gorgeous blonde and crying. I asked if she needed help, and the look of relief warmed my heart as she tearfully nodded. I opened the door and gave her my umbrella. She scurried over to the passenger door, unbuckled the children, and led them to the cover of the front porch. I got into the driver's seat, straightened out the wheels, and put it into low gear. I eased on the gas pedal so the rear wheels wouldn't spin and slowly inched forward to get out of the rut she had dug. To do that, I had to tear up more of her front yard, but it was the easiest solution. Soon, I had the truck and trailer back on the street, ready for another attempt. Most people have never had to drive a vehicle hauling a trailer. The secret to reversing with a trailer is you have to turn opposite the way you would normally reverse. Slowly, I negotiated the trailer up the drive until both the trailer and truck were in the driveway, ready to be unloaded. I turned off the vehicle and ran hunched over from the rain to the porch. The kids were applauding, and a big grin was now on the blonde angel. I decided right then that I enjoyed her more grinning than crying. Here are the keys. I handed them over to her. Thank you so much for helping us. I don't know what I was going to do. Damn. She even had the sweetest southern drawl possible. Always glad to help out a neighbor. I'm John Carter. I assume you are my new neighbors? Oh, forgive my rudeness. I'm Samantha Turner, and these two monsters are Ryan and Sophia. The description brought on a stream of protest from the children as they clutched their mother, trying to make her stop. I grinned at the shenanigans as the crisis passed and all could relax. I told her, I hope you have help coming to unload because I can tell the truck and trailer are weighed down. A look of sadness crossed her face. No, I had help loading, but it's just the three of us unloading here. Let me help, and if it gets too bad, I can call some people over. I was rewarded with another look of gratitude as she thanked me. I suggested I would do what unloading I could by myself, and then we would figure things out. The three disappeared into their house, and cries of disappointment erupted from inside. I went into the dimly lit front room. Megan was upset as she told me the power was supposed to be on. I told her to hold on and went outside to call a buddy that worked for the power company. I gave him the address and he said he remembered that particular job for installing the meter, but no one was home, so under company policy he had left. He was scheduled to return Monday afternoon to try again. Well, they're here now, and it's a lady with two small kids. You owe me some favors, so get over here, install the meter, and then get creative with the paperwork. He agreed to come out and I hung up. I went back and told Megan the power would be on soon. She thanked me, and again the kids burst into applause. With that, I unlocked the trailer and began hauling boxes into the front room. Megan helped carry smaller, lighter boxes while the children watched from the porch. They were so cute as they argued over who would get to sleep in their room first. Megan gave me a sardonic grin as she noticed me observing the children. I reminded her to leave the heavy boxes to me. I took a large box from her and carried it inside. Just as we finished unloading the trailer, my friend Mark drove up in his company utility truck. In a few minutes, lights came on throughout the house. This energized the kids, and they began running from room to room exploring. Mark went back to his truck to get the paperwork for Megan to sign. "So, Dan, you got everything unloaded?" Mark asked. I replied, "Mark, we're still working on the trailer and haven't started on the truck yet." Without saying anything else, Mark walked to the trailer, picked up a box and started carrying it inside. That gave me the idea to make several calls. I told Megan and Mark to take a break. We sat there getting acquainted. Megan told us she was an elementary school teacher. Before I could ask how she could afford a house in the neighborhood, the cavalry arrived. Friends with wives and kids started arriving, bringing pizzas, beer for the adults, and soda for the kids. Most importantly, they brought strong backs. A whirlwind of activity ensued as the truck got unloaded. My friends' wives were given a tour of the house. An army of kids chased each other throughout, and decorating strategy was discussed nonstop. Boxes were opened, and contents taken to the proper rooms. Furniture was unloaded and bedroom sets assembled in the proper rooms. The living room was decorated, signaling the end of the truck unloading. Then it was a matter of just relaxing and visiting with friends. I was impressed how easily Megan adapted to hosting an impromptu party with people she had just met. I realized her warm manners were quickly making her friends as phone numbers were shared, and lunch dates were made among the women. Mark leaned toward me, nudged me with his beer bottle, and whispered, "You know, the common denominator between all these ladies is you. Get ready for your ears to be burning." I laughed and told him about my idea for a pool. We started throwing out ideas, and more guys chimed in with opinions. There I was with the guys talking and Megan talking to the girls. Every now and then, we would steal a glance at each other and smile. Slowly, the party broke up, and all the guests left. Megan allowed me to carry the slumbering kids upstairs to their beds. She tucked them in and kissed her sleeping angels goodnight. Wordlessly, we went downstairs and outside to sit on the front steps. I offered her a beer, and she shook her head no. So, I twisted the cap off the icy long neck and took a deep swallow. We continued just to sit, relaxing. "Dan, you are my hero. Thank you so much for all you've done for us." "Megan, I'm just being neighborly. There's no need to thank me." "Nonsense," she insisted. "If it wasn't for you, I'd still be stuck in my front yard with 2 crying kids and no power. I owe you big time, mister." I laughed and said, "Wait till you get to know me." I took another swig. "Speaking of the truck, what are you going to do with it?" An anguished look appeared on Megan's face as she related the horror story of driving cross-country in the truck. She had countless irate drivers honk at her when she was forced to stop for gas, food, or potty breaks. Her unfamiliarity with driving a truck caused traffic jams at gas stations, fast food places, and motels. Usually, she suffered humiliations and profanities hurled at her until she somehow solved her dilemma. "And now I have to return the truck cross-country," she cried. Explaining the U-Haul store insisted she return it to their location. I placed my hand on her shoulder and reassured her. "Megan, I'll take care of returning the truck." She looked at me in shock. "Dan, I can't let you do that." "Megan, you can't subject your kids to another trip like that. I can take care of this. Don't worry about the truck. It's not like I'm going to steal it, and you know where I live." She argued for another couple of hours until my logic finally won out. She gave me all the rental papers and asked when I would leave. I told her around 9 a.m. She said if I was leaving that early, maybe we ought to call it a night. As we stood up, she gave me an impulsive hug and kissed me on the cheek. "Good night." She was inside before I could react. I had a warm glow as I walked home. The next morning, I knocked on Megan's door. She opened it, and I was beset with twin typhoons hugging my legs, calling me Mr. Dan. I laughed, picked them both up, and carried them inside. Megan nervously handed me the keys and an envelope full of 20 bills. She explained it was for gas money and a bus ticket back home. "Dan, Please be careful, she told me as I fired up the truck and backed the trailer down the drive. When will you be back? She asked. I smiled. Sooner than you think. I drove toward the interstate, and right before I got to the on-ramp, I turned into the local U-Haul store. I walked inside and saw the person I wanted to deal with. Hi, Dan, what's up? The store manager shook my hand. Hi, Perry. I'm returning a truck for a friend. I handed him the paperwork and he studied it. Dan, this says it was supposed to be a round-trip rental. The truck and trailer are due back there. Well, Perry, things have changed, and this needs to be a one-way rental. They'll pay whatever extra is due for changing the terms. Okay, let me clear this with the originating store. While I waited, I noticed Perry engaged in an escalating conversation. Finally, he yelled he would damn well accept delivery of the trailer and truck and slammed the phone down. He walked to me and said, "Not a word from you, Dan." I just smiled and handed him the keys as he inspected the truck, then a credit card to cover the change from a round-trip rental to a one-way. He handed me a receipt, and I thanked him, violating his order. Then I called a taxi. 30 minutes later, I got out in front of my house. As luck would have it, Ryan and Sophia were playing outside. Once they saw me, cries of Mr. Dan filled the air. A grimy Megan came outside to investigate, her eyes widening in surprise. What happened? Please don't tell me you had an accident. I laughed and told her I was back from dropping off the truck and trailer at the local U-Haul store. She frowned. But back home, they told me I had to contract it for a round trip. They wouldn't let me have it unless I returned it. Megan, when I talked to the local U-Haul manager, he called them and explained the change in circumstances and got them to agree to allow him to accept the delivery of the truck. Okay, it was a lie, but it didn't hurt anyone except the jerks that rented the truck. It solved a problem. At any rate, Megan smiled as I gave her the receipt, signifying the transaction was complete. Looks like you're having fun. I indicated her dirty clothes. She told me she underestimated the complexities of the house. I told her if it got too bad to come over and get me, and I'd help her out. I then gave back the envelope of cash she had given me that morning and walked back to my house. Despite losing half the morning, I soon had the entire second-floor stain applied and started on the first floor. The therapeutic release it gave me was now counterbalanced by thinking of the enticing blonde next door. I realized I was humming as I applied the stain. It had been a long time since I felt like humming. A knock on the door ended my humming, and I opened it to an anxious Megan. I have a plumbing emergency. There's water leaking under my toilet. Can you help me? Let me grab some tools and it'll be right over, Megan. I quickly gathered up the tools I suspected I would need and went next door. Ryan and Sophia were waiting for me at the door and shouted the arrival of Mr. Dan to the world. They led me upstairs to the master bedroom, where I found Megan in the bathroom, furiously wiping up water with a towel, wringing it into the sink. Setting my tools down, I knelt and turned off the water at the valve. I then flushed the toilet to empty the tank and bowl, bringing another flood of water to leak out. I told Megan I would handle it. She moved away, trying to remove the bra and panties hanging from the shower rod without me noticing. I pretended not to see her doing it as she stood in the doorway. From practice, I quickly had the tank disconnected from the water line and removed from the bowl. Then the bowl was off, and as I suspected, the wax ring had failed. I removed the remnants of the old wax ring and replaced it with a spare ring from my own renovations. All the while, I explained what I was doing to Megan. I caulked around the bottom of the bowl and carefully placed the bowl on the flange. I pressed down on the bowl and told Megan to sit on the toilet lid. She giggled as I told her that her weight would ensure the wax ring sealed properly as I moved around, screwing the bolts to the flange screws. I got the crazy idea of screwing her even after I was sure the ring had sealed. I kept her sitting despite the awkward positions. Finally, I had to tell her to get up so I could reattach the tank. Soon it was bolted on, and I turned the water back on and did a test flush. There was no rush of water, and Megan yelled victory. I finished with another bead of caulk around the bottom. After that, it was just a matter of mopping and cleaning up. She moved to hug me, but I indicated my soaked clothes. "Let me wash them," she cried. I reminded her I would be running around naked, and she blushed. She said she would like to treat me to a meal, But without her car, she hadn't had a chance to shop for groceries. She and the kids were surviving on delivery food. I told her if she liked, I would go home, shower, and take them out for supper. She was concerned they were imposing on me too much. I told her not to think that and I would be there at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m., I pulled into their garage, and they came out. Megan expressed surprise that I had bought 2 booster seats for Ryan and Sophia. We got the kids situated, and I took them to a nice Italian restaurant. I continued to get acquainted with my new neighbors as Ryan and Sophia took turns telling me things. Megan just sat and smiled as her 2 darlings ingrained themselves into my heart. A couple of times, they divulged personal information, causing Megan to blush and quickly steer the conversation in another direction. After the meal, I took them for ice cream at a place with a children's play area. We watched as they played. The sheer look of love on Megan's face as she watched her children was the look artists have tried to capture since the dawn of civilization. She noticed my staring at her and diverted her attention back to me. "So, you like me, Samantha Turner?" I teased. She immediately blushed. My God, I wanted to sink into the earth when Ryan blurted that out. From that point, our conversation segued into various topics, including why Megan didn't have her car. She explained her brother, an engineer, would be returning from duty overseas and driving her car to them. Until then, they would be renting a car starting tomorrow. "Nonsense, just borrow mine," I said. "I rarely drive it anyway since I'm usually in my truck." Again, we argued until I convinced her borrowing my car was the cheapest and easiest solution. When we started home, the kids drifted to sleep almost immediately, worn out from their exertions. On the way, I pointed out the various controls and features of the car to Megan as she quietly took it all in. I parked in her driveway and gathered Ryan in my arms as Megan unlocked the house. I put him on the bed, and Megan tucked him in. I went and got Sophia, and Megan was waiting. I put her to bed, and once again she fussed over her. I realized I missed that part of raising a family. The sadness must have been showing because Megan had a worried look as she looked at me. I tried to assure her I was okay, but I think she knew differently. As I placed my car keys in her hand, she gently touched my cheek with her other hand and, raising up on tiptoes, gave me a soft good-night kiss. I couldn't be sure, but I think I levitated all the way back to my home. Monday found me back at my job, but I couldn't concentrate thinking about Megan. I turned off my computer and began doing various odd jobs around the house, including finishing the staining of the first floor. So in that way, it was a good day as the number of house projects continued to dwindle. It wasn't that I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I was quickly approaching the tunnel nonetheless. I heard voices calling for Mr. Dan before the knock on the door. I grinned as I opened the door. "Mr. Dan, come eat with us." The kids chimed as Megan invited me to their first home-cooked meal. I asked for 15 minutes for a quick shower, and she said they would be waiting. When I arrived, the dining room table was filled with fried chicken, southern fried potatoes, biscuits and gravy, corn, and black-eyed peas. The scent of a warm apple pie also announced its presence. Both kids argued they wanted to sit by me, and Megan said the only way to solve that was for me to sit at the head of the table. The kids sat on either side of me and Megan sat opposite. The kids said grace and then we all buried ourselves in the meal. I stuffed myself with the fabulous food and groaned as a slice of apple pie a la mode appeared for me. Somehow, I finished every delicious morsel. Then I was drafted to play various children's games for the rest of the evening. 9 p.m. came, and the children trudged off to bed with Megan following. Halfway up, she stopped and invited me upstairs. I went up and read a bedtime story to Ryan while Megan did the same for Sophia. As they slept, we sneaked downstairs, and Megan put on a pot of coffee. As it brewed, we cleaned up from the meal and soon had everything in order. She poured a large ceramic mug full for me and asked how I took it. When I told her black, she wrinkled her nose as she poured cream into hers. She handed me the mug, and we walked outside to the porch swing. It was an unseasonably agreeable October night. As we sipped the steaming coffee, we started talking about Ryan and Sophia. Before I knew it, I was telling her about Emily and Ethan. Then the floodgates spilled open as I told her about the flaming wreck my family and life were. When I finished, Megan's eyes pooled with tears of sympathy, and she placed her head on my torso, consoling me. It was pleasant to have someone empathize with what I had been going through. Then, in a quiet, soft voice, she told me what brought her and the children cross-country. She had lived an ideal childhood, was the homecoming queen, and married her childhood boyfriend. They went off to college, got their degrees, and then began raising their family. Somewhere along the line, the train ran off the tracks. They began to argue, mostly about his flirtations with other women. The flirtations escalated to full-blown affairs, and the arguments became physical. Luckily, the children were too young to understand the drama. The D word figured more and more into Megan and her husband's conversations when they were talking. Then came the fateful call one night from the police. A young woman driver had been killed in a one-car accident. Thrown out of the wreckage was her deceased husband. From all indications, they were involved in a sexual act at the time of the accident. From that point, a hellish existence of dealing with the situation ensued. Her in-laws blamed Megan, the dead girl's family blamed Megan, and to a certain point, Megan blamed Megan. The estate slowly moved through probate as the in-laws' legal maneuvers ate into her late husband's assets. Then the dead girl's family filed a lawsuit, and Megan was forced to countersue. Somehow, she waded through the gauntlet, and when all the dust settled, she decided on a clean break. She researched all regions of the country to relocate, and karma led her to my neighborhood. She used all her money to purchase her house, and now all she had left was the promise of a job in the school district and an underperforming hedge fund account she would have to dip into to cover expenses until she started her job. One thing she hadn't counted on was the house repairs, which also ate away at her savings. Through it all, she still had no regrets for moving here. We sat silently, contemplating as the swing slowly swayed. Then I told her I wanted to look at her hedge fund account. I was sure I could get her stock portfolio back on a successful track. She got up, went inside, and returned with a file. I took the papers and told her I would look at them overnight. She told me to keep them and bring them back tomorrow night at supper. Then she gave me another goodnight kiss. As soon as I got home, I started studying her hedge fund account and became aware of all the unethical ways the manager used to enrich himself. Not only was he a crook, but he was an incompetent one based on his stock selection. I had no doubt I could effect a 30 positive change in her account in the first year alone. I began redlining things to point out to Megan tomorrow and went to bed still thinking about her kiss. Supper time found me at Megan's for another tasty meal followed by more children's games and bedtime readings. This time I read Sophia to sleep, tucked her in, and told her good night. The night was colder and precluded being outside, and I needed the table to spread out my analysis spreadsheets and projections for Megan. I had it all laid out as she came downstairs, started another pot of coffee, and asked what I found out. I told her she was being cheated and I could help her as I began to explain in detail. She started walking into the den. I asked what was wrong. She replied nothing was wrong, that she trusted me, and there was no need to explain. She wanted me to come into the den and relax. I followed her and we sat and talked into the night. As the fire died out in the fireplace, I realized despite the age difference, I was much more comfortable with Megan than I had been with Olivia. As we kissed goodnight, I left with her signature authorizing me to take over her stock account and a standing invitation to supper. As soon as I woke up, I began to get Megan's financial situation stabilized. I called her former broker, told him he was fired, and I was handling the account. He started getting disagreeable until I mentioned perhaps I needed to call the SEC. Those magic words brought an entire change in attitude, and I got him to agree to reimburse Megan every fee he had charged, to the tune of $5,000. Within minutes, I had electronic confirmation of the change in her account. Not bad for 10 minutes of work. I began to restructure her portfolio, dumping some real loser stocks and reinvesting in blue-chip stocks. The remainder I put into aggressive volatile stocks which would require constant monitoring but, if handled properly, would give her a great return. Even better, I wouldn't charge her a broker fee on any transactions. By the end of the day's trading, I was pleased with my performance. I went next door for supper with a happy heart. When I began to broach the subject to Megan, She stopped me and told me she trusted me and I didn't need to worry about giving a daily account. So, I continued trading on her account and seeing her every night. Weekends were spent showing her and the kids around the city instead of home projects. Well, that wasn't entirely correct. I was helping Megan at her house. Her house was in the same state of disrepair as mine had been, so my expertise came in handy. We would discuss a problem, I would offer solutions, and Megan would decide. Megan also decided the pace of our relationship. Our goodnight kiss soon became makeout sessions once the kids were asleep. She only allowed me to get to second base because she felt uncomfortable doing anything while the kids were upstairs. Just holding that wonderful body next to mine was enough, even if I went home every night with blue balls. Then Megan's brother Paul and his family arrived with her car. We grilled steaks as he and I got acquainted. I could tell Megan would be asking him what he thought of me, and I wanted it to be an honest opinion. So I didn't try any pretense. Paul, I'm just gonna put this out there for you. I'm in love with Megan, and I intend to marry her whenever she's ready. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I treasure every moment with her. I know she values your opinion, and I realize we just met, and you don't know me well yet, but give me time, and it'll prove how much I care for her. Mark, I know from the first day you met, you've been there for Megan and the kids. She cares very much for you, and I think you two belong together. But understand, if you ever hurt her like that son of a bitch did, then you and I will have an unpleasant meeting. With that, we clicked beer bottles and brought the steaks inside. After the meal, James and Sarah took their cousins upstairs as Megan and I talked with Paul and his wife. Our talk got to the point where Paul and Megan began talking about embarrassing childhood moments. Megan screamed in jovial protest as Paul continued all night. Finally, Paul looked at his wife and said, "Honey, let's get the children to bed and then get to sleep in Megan's room." With that implication hanging in the air, we said good night. Without a word, Megan and I held hands as we walked to my house to my bedroom. We had the wildest and most amazing sex of my life. I have no idea how long we continued to caress each other in the afterglow. But soon we mutually discovered our physical efforts had gotten us both hungry. We laughed and rose from the bed. I put on my shorts and reached for my t-shirt when Megan told me that was what she was wearing. I was ready to ravish her again as she draped her new gown impishly on her body. We went downstairs and raided the refrigerator. I was pleased to see our conversation was relaxed and easy as we transitioned from neighbors to friends to lovers. Every glimpse of her at the kitchen table had me desiring her more. She sat with her bare feet propped against the edge of the seat, still draped in just my t-shirt. I gathered her in my arms and carried her upstairs. I placed her on my bed again as I looked in amazement at my woman. At that moment, I realized I would do anything for her. I would protect her with all my might, and I wouldn't allow anything or anyone to come between us. It was that moment of serendipity that made me realize the difference between Olivia and Megan. My time for mourning the past and working nonstop was over. Now was the time to start living again. I cradled against Megan, and she placed my arm over her to protect her against the night. I think we both knew we would have a delightful wake-up in the morning. I kissed her goodnight and soon fell asleep. Months passed until one afternoon, the front doorbell rang. Much to my surprise, there stood Olivia and her lover, Mike Dawson, with Emily and Ethan in tow. I suppose I should have expected it since word had gotten to me they were back in town. Olivia said she had a proposition and asked if we could talk. I closed the door behind me and waited. I think it unsettled them that I didn't invite them inside. I waited for someone to speak since I had nothing to say to them. Olivia recovered from my rudeness and began speaking. She told me she had handled our situation all wrong and wanted to make amends. It turned out Tom was the fraternity boy her sorority had set her up with years ago. We had been rivals even though we never met. Olivia had continued seeing him, and it was a 5,050 chance that either of us had impregnated her. Olivia chose me and expected to live her life with me. Then in law school, much to her surprise, Tom was one of her classmates. He continued to pursue her, and she resisted as long as she could, but finally, she succumbed to his charm again, rekindling their affair. When Olivia graduated and we moved to Miami, she expected that to be the end of it. After our move to Portland and her transfer to New York, she discovered Tom working at another firm. One thing led to another, and she was once again in his arms. At his insistence, she had the kids tested, and they both came back as Tom's progeny. Surely, I could understand the kids' desire to be reunited with their biological father. I continued to hold my temper and bit my tongue as Olivia continued. Since I had hit a wall career-wise, it was incumbent on Olivia to do what was best for the family, and that meant divorcing me and getting as much as she could for her children. That's why she insisted on half the proceeds from the marital house, even though I made all the payments. Now to the crux of the matter. The family was moving back to Portland in anticipation of her promotion to partnership. Word had spread as far as New York about the recent gentrification of my grandmother's old neighborhood. Everyone was seeking to buy and restore the old mansions to their former glory. Olivia knew I was unemployed from the brokerage firm since the divorce and couldn't afford to give my grandmother's house the attention it needed. She proposed signing over the marital home to me and paying off the mortgage. In addition, she had a cashier's check for $100,000. All I had to do was sign over the deed to my grandmother's house, and I would be even with her. I continued to stare at her as she brandished the check. Slowly, her arm came down as I remained quiet. I softly invited them inside, and I thought I saw traces of victory smiles on their faces as they entered. I was pleased to hear their surprised gasps as they looked at the foyer lit by the large crystal chandelier. I explained in detail the efforts I had undertaken to restore the entrance to its glory. From there, I led them into the drawing room, where the exquisite details of the room were matched by the expensive, tasteful furniture. I continued to lecture them on my efforts in each room as they looked in amazement at the rich transition of my home. The conservatory drew gasps from Emily as she saw the Steinway grand piano featured in the room. She had always expressed an interest in music, and the best I could afford her as a child was an electric keyboard. She sadly traced her fingers alongside it as we went to the next room. Then we went upstairs to the large, comfortable bedrooms, ending up in the master bedroom with warm natural light bathing its glory. The master's bath included a walk-in shower with multiple shower heads, and the large re-enameled clawfoot bathtub gilded in gold leaf. I led them out to the balcony overlooking the Olympic-sized pool with a pool house and hot tub on the patio deck. I continued to lead them through each room until finally, we wound up in my study. I explained the mahogany paneling and my efforts to find suitable furnishings to complement the decor. I pointed out all the expensive first edition books lined in the built-in bookcases as my pet golden retriever, Buddy, padded up to me and sat by me on my sofa. Olivia looked on in disgust as she had always hated dogs. As you can imagine, I didn't care what she liked anymore. Now, having taken the tour, do you really think I would be interested in moving back into that hellhole that caused me misery? Before anyone could answer, two whirlwinds launched themselves into my lap. Daddy, we're back from the aquarium, James shouted. That's aquarium, Sarah corrected him. James lost no steam as he and Sarah began describing their trip. Then James told me, but Daddy, our aquarium is better, to which Sarah agreed that our basement wall aquarium I built for them was much better. Olivia had been startled and surprised at the interruption. I gave her no explanation as Megan waddled in, 7 months pregnant. Oh honey, I didn't know you had guests. I quickly went to her side and asked how she felt as I guided her into a chair. I was rewarded with a gratifying smile as she kissed me. I announced they aren't guests. They're just leaving. I led them outside and told them never to come back. As they drove off, I knew they had a million questions, and they would never find out the answers, like how I immediately moved out after returning from New York, back into my grandmother's house. Once I got in there, I realized the quality structure was still sound, and I could restore it myself. Eventually, it turned into part of my therapy. The other part of my therapy was at work. After all the years at brokerage firms, I had learned countless ways a broker could circumvent the firm's safeguards and put it at risk. Even though I was technically supposed to clear all transactions with my superior, I pretty much had carte blanche to trade since my reputation was as a cautious, surefire trader. But when I got back from New York, I opened an account in a fictitious business name and, using firm funds, began an avalanche of trading. By day's end, I had several $1,000s profit in the account and replaced every dollar into the firm's coffers. I then erased the transactions from the firm's computers so no records remained, and I was off and running. I know what I did was illegal, but I reconciled myself with knowing how much I earned for everyone I worked for over the years. I was satisfied with one day's payback. The next day, I began aggressively trading again and was up 10,000 by the close. That pattern continued all week as I doubled or tripled my money. When I had close to 200,000, I took a short position on some top-heavy tech stocks. I timed it just right, ringing up 600 profits on each one without responding to a margin call. Now I was worth more than $1 million. Then my superior sniffed around, the same man who gave me that damning review. He insisted I hand over the account to him. I made a couple of keystrokes, cashing in the account to an offshore account, and turned to him, telling him to go screw himself and quit on the spot. Since that time, I continued my run until I was quite wealthy. That's why I had no objection to signing Olivia's property settlement agreement. In her rush to protect her assets, she neglected to see if I had any. They continued to grow aggressively until I met Megan and realized I had a chance at starting over. When I married Megan, I finally revealed how much was in her account. She almost fainted at the mention of $2 million. Actually, she almost fainted when I told her I was worth just north of $40 million. Then I made her aware I owned every house in a block area around our houses. Her house had been the only one I was unable to purchase, and it turned out to be the best investment I ever didn't make. One last thing Olivia would never know was how wealth correlated to power. That much wealth required a lot of legal oversight, a good portion of which I retained Olivia's firm to oversee. Even though she was unaware, I had made it known to enough senior partners how unhappy I would be if Olivia made partner. That is, if she still had a law license. You see, Olivia and Tom went to the bank that held the mortgage on our marital home and forged my name on paperwork for a second mortgage to fund the cashier's check they tried to entice me with, saddling me with the second mortgage. Too bad they didn't know I also owned the bank and had orders to be personally notified if anything flagged that account. My good friend, the district attorney, whom I endorsed in the last election, would file forgery charges on Olivia and Tom. Furthermore, he assured me he would lead the way to see they both were disbarred from law practice. I casually wondered if Olivia would represent herself or have a public defender at her trial. She wouldn't have much left after the announcement of the low-income Section 8 housing development project next to my good friends at the Homeowners Association. A contracting firm owned by my conglomerate would build the project, nosediving the property values. Since I purchased the land to donate as a tax break on some of my annual profit, it all tied in. I sat by my darling wife and propped her feet into my lap, gently massaging them as our children, whom I had adopted, watched TV with their cousins who moved into Megan's old house she gave to her brother. The contented sighs from her pleased me as I got a smile. It was the smile I got when I was in for a special night. Of course, every night with Megan was special. I smiled back and continued to rub her feet. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Quick question: what would you do if you were in John Carter's situation? Let us know in the comments.